YouTube things.
There it is.
We got it.
Great. Hey, welcome everyone, and welcome Leiden C, Luis, and Katharina. It was wonderful to see you. I see you're still in the same Zoom as you were last week at Euros. Yeah. And congratulations once for winning. I'm very excited to be speaking with you on this topic. Tell me, first of all, what was it like to be in that final? Was it any other debate for you guys, or did it feel incredibly special? Were you a bit nervous?
First, which final?
I actually think there is a reasonable answer, though, in the sense that I think before the debates we were very, very nervous. But in the debates, I think they were significantly more just like any other debate that you're trying to win.
Yeah.
Which I think was partly the absence of an audience, in the sense that there was no one in the room, which could have changed it. But
So you were of course with all the other Leiden teams in one house. So they all like stuck themselves into the live stream, or they listened in through the door.
Yeah.
They were in the live stream. They were watching the live stream. So everything they did in terms of applause came like 20 seconds late, which was amazing. So of course you spoke the ESL final, then right after you had to speak in the open final. After the ESL final, did you feel very confident about your chances? Did you think you might have won, or were you absolutely dumbfounded by what had gone on just now?
I think we were quite happy about our chances. We also didn't want to think that much about it. Like, you don't want to get your hopes up, obviously. Like, if you lose, that's sad. But also, it was just, we had to do another round. We had to do another final, and all the focus had to be directed that way. So that's also what we did.
Very good. Yeah. So, and then when you spoke the open final, did you notice a difference? I mean, obviously this year, almost every speaker could have contested both of these finals, with the exception of one of the speakers on opening opposition. But did it feel like a different venue for you?
Not very much, actually. I think it felt like probably, I mean, I think Emma and David, also partly because they won, but also I think in their general performance, were an incredibly strong team. So in that sense, I think it was a separate challenge, because I mean, it would have been very, very cool, obviously, to beat them, but it was somehow separately very unlikely in my mind, at the very least, that we would. Yeah. So it was a bit different, but it was very, very, very fun. And I think like the Zoom being the same, the way that everything was managed being the same, did keep it quite similar in the end.
And yeah, I did think that the open final was just a higher level. It's a higher level of debate. The teams that we had to beat was like, that was harder to beat. And therefore the way we went into it was different. In the ESL final, we were there to definitely win. And in the final, we were there to just have our best performance that we can, and then if we would win, that would obviously be great. But that's a different way of going into the debate.
That was also position, though.
Yeah,
I think if we had been closing in the open final, we would have felt very differently than being opening government.
Yeah.
And that's probably very fair. In a final, it's always the most difficult situation to be in. And I can imagine, especially for you, Louis, as being the first speaker, at the very least in a normal final as Prime Minister, you get some kind of like audience feedback or something. But now you gave your speech and there was absolutely no way of telling what was going to happen next, because you didn't know what's going on. So it must have been a very strange experience indeed.
Definitely. It was, I think, therefore already quite hard, also because the motion was very broad. There were a lot of arguments that we tried to anticipate from opposition. We partly succeeded in that, but also partly not, because sort of the clash that we in the end wanted to win, we lost. Whereas a lot of the material that we tried to anticipate did not end up to be as relevant as we sort of thought in the debate. But still, for me, it was different. Like, I did think a lot of people were watching. So you don't have the feedback, but you sort of have the extra pressure of an audience, which was cool.
Very cool, yeah. So there's a meme going around of your team on the Facebook groups of an increasingly muscular dog when you progress further through the rounds. Did you feel yourself that you were growing into the tournament, that you were learning and improving as you went on? And how did that feel? What did you feel you learned?
I think very much so. Throughout, I mean, I think the meme is partly based on the fact that we were sitting around very differently after the 3 days and feeling very differently happy or not happy with how we've done. Growing into it definitely, I think, also came and just we realized during Euros, because it was, I think, a very quick succession of competitive rounds, which although we had trained together a lot, we didn't do an online prep tournament. So I think we hadn't really done that. So I think there was just a lot of things we could very quickly incorporate in a relatively, I mean, isolated from the rest of the world environment where that was genuinely the priority. And that was incredibly, incredibly rewarding because, I mean, on day 3, we genuinely felt smarter and better at the game. And that's great.
Yeah. I think the added pressure also meant that we did become more serious in day 3, and especially in outrounds. We started to sort of every time before a round, we repeated what we were going to focus on to each other, which we didn't necessarily do in day 1. So we felt more pressure. We wanted to do better. I think that definitely helped.
Very fair. So you mentioned you didn't do an enormous amount of prep competitions together yet, but I am wondering how you did prepare. So maybe first, like, how did you come to speak together as a team? Is this we just like each other and want to speak together, or is this, or did you think you were going to be very good together?
I mean, I think we became friends before we considered speaking together.
Yeah.
And then we did one tournament together, which actually went like vaguely meh. But we had a lot of fun talking about debating and talking about coaching and judging together, and figured that we probably could be quite good. And then did a lot of experimenting with that in training rounds, in online training rounds later on as well, and learned from that.
Yeah, definitely a big part of our preparation was not necessarily purely focused on debates, but just sort of chilling together and then talking about motions. And sort of us having very much the same ideas about debating, which points are relevant, which points are not relevant at all. That definitely helps us to grow as a team.
Yeah. So you're now the second team that I speak that talks about the fact that you can just chill and prep about motions, and that is actually maybe a better approach than going gung-ho, build an enormous Google Doc with all the case files. Maybe you've done that, I don't know, but it sounds like a very more relaxing approach.
Yeah, exactly.
So what do you feel that your strengths and weaknesses are as speakers? Like, what do each of you bring to the team?
I think I'm very efficient in bringing in analysis. Like not necessarily just by speaking fast, but definitely also by speaking fast. And I think I gain a lot from being occasionally told not to run analysis just because I think it's interesting. So I think that is something that I need, because I tend to get hung up on stuff that I find very interesting, and then that is not necessarily very relevant. So I think that was something where I definitely needed to be, well, knocked over the head and told to stop.
I think I had the exact opposite, where I was thinking much more sort of about what could your road to victory be, and then we had a cool idea, and then I stopped there. So I was like, okay, we have a cool idea. Surely we can win the debate with this, which you can't if you don't have analysis, if you don't sort of back that up and are super specific in the way you explain that. Because in the end of the day, other teams will also have cool ideas, and if they do explain those, you're going to be screwed. And much more of focus learning from Kat's analysis as well. I copied a lot of shit. Was definitely super useful. So I think that's sort of the way that we did this. We very much acknowledged that we had like those strengths, and then try to improve on the thing that the other team partner brought to the debate.
I think.
So yeah, go ahead.
I think in this, we had a bit of a weird experience just before Euros, because we were very much wanting to improve the other way, in the sense that I wanted to have more of a strategic understanding of debates and sort of what I needed to do with my time. And I think we wanted to get better at mechanizing points and making sure that they really stuck. So we flipped positions in closing half the day before Euros, because we had been preparing that for a very, very long time, with me whipping and you doing extensions. And I think it was genuinely very helpful for me in making us less diametrically opposed on skills, because before that we were very different in what we brought to the table, and I think that sometimes made it hard to communicate exactly what we wanted the other person to do, which got much better after we flipped for a while.
At the same time, I watched both of your semifinals, and you were both in opening half for that. And I just noticed you did one strategy, I think, extremely well, where like Louis sets out a case, sometimes even a bit of a defensive case, which just lays down, I think, a general overview. And then whichever was the part that the other side didn't respond that much, that was like the thing where you came in and you just took that part and was like, okay, you forgot all about that. Here's what's important, and you just run it through very well. So it does feel like there's a large amount of very good strategic understanding between the two of you. And are those like deliberate choices you made? Did you think about certain positions as well in the debate and what you needed to bring differently on the table for each?
Yeah, definitely. So this, like, we're happy that you noticed, because that was actually sort of the idea for our openings, because we knew that Kat would be definitely better at sort of bringing home points, which could be really important. I would, in general, be better at sort of setting up the debates, making choices like what's the framing that our team wants to use. And definitely, it is sort of backloading. It is sort of trying to gain maximum advantage from having a deputy, which is able to bring home points. So yeah, there was definitely a strategic choice that we made. We were thinking of possibly, like, we always wanted to sort of have an argument in Kat, which wasn't in me already, if that was possible. So that was definitely what we're going for.
Very, very good. Now, obviously, you seemingly have improved quite quick, both of you, because I think the past year or year and a half, you've really grown from being contenders for making to semifinals to now being the reigning European ESL champions and open finalists. What was that process like? Even perhaps before speaking with one another, what clicked for you that made it possible for both of you to improve so much?
I think we had very different journeys in this. Mine was going to speak with all the different partners and then sort of specializing in whatever that partner couldn't do in terms of speech and making sure that I got good at it. I was incredibly lucky that I got to speak with Mila, so I could learn to do extensions properly, because I hadn't really done that at Euros before. And I think then at Amsterdam Open with colleagues, and who I whipped and spoke deputies for, to just develop a bunch of skills really quickly by necessity, but having sort of the input from really brilliant speakers that I could work with and incorporate into my own speaking process. I think that is the main thing for how I developed before we started training.
Yeah. For me, it was definitely coaching for a big part, and judging, and like the two go together. And what, in the way that it helped me was, there's a lot of things in debating which you can quite easily improve if you know what you have to improve. Like, for a lot of the things in debating, such as framing, such as analyzing, there's just finding 3 reasons why something is true, giving rebuttal, all of the things is just something that you have to, like, you have to actively think that you have to do it in a speech, and then usually you can do it because you've had a lot of practice. So for me, it was definitely beneficial to try to teach others debating, and therefore seeing what they needed to do, therefore also seeing what I needed to do and improve. And once I started sort of actively thinking about that, what was missing from my speech in every speech, that made me a much better speaker, because all the skills I could already do, but I just didn't think to do it.
I like a lot about this answer because, as you're both pointing out, there's just this diversification, trying something new, speaking with different people, trying different aspects of the game, that those really allow you to get better at it. And I think what you're highlighting here, of course, is like, obviously debating is a very diverse game. You need to do a lot of things at the same time. So testing out these different things, I think, is an incredibly good response in that sense. Did you also feel, in terms of, say, the knowledge that you needed to gain, that you didn't need to do a lot of work outside of debating in order to get good at it, or did you guys manage to just do some debating and that's all the knowledge you need to get through it?
I think we did quite a lot of knowledge gathering before Euros, but I'm going to say it was relatively useless. Insofar as I think we did not use our knowledge beyond. So I mean, I think the open semifinal is like a reasonably good example of this, where we have sort of basic generic debater knowledge. And then, I mean, I read up on Syria, admittedly not this particular component of it. I read up on Israel before Euros, but we didn't use any of this. We used the basic building blocks of sort of debate assumptions about who is aligned with who and what they want, and built on that. And I think that was probably more useful for us in preparation as well than necessarily alternatives would have been. Like, sometimes surely knowing something is a good sort of starting point for, oh, could we analyze this? Or you've seen an argument for why something is good or bad, and you think, okay, can this be useful in debate? And I mean, I like knowing things, it's great, but I don't think it's necessarily good for winning debates in all situations. I think it's good for making sure you don't lie your ass off, which is probably a wise choice.
Yeah, I mean, exactly this actually. Knowing a lot of stuff can really help you. It did not help us, I think, at all.
No.
We just went with other ways to win debates and not knowledge.
Yeah. I do think we did lie in our own estimation at least, so that's good.
Yeah, no.
That is very fair. And I imagine as well, in the English as a second language final, none of you ever thought about sending astronauts to a 2020th century of alternative Earth and whether or not these people should hold a particular religion. So potentially a very interesting thing is, when you see that motion, like, how was your thought process like? Did you quickly zone in on the detail, or were you just sitting there for the first 5 minutes thinking, how do I argue this?
I mean, I think to some extent we were both surprised that the motion was religion rather than Marxism in space. So I think after recovering from that, though, we were very quickly on sort of what are dynamics of religion we've thought about before, how could they play out.
Actually, our prep in the ESL final was very weird, because in all other debates, even when we were closing, we had a couple of potential cases. I think after our prep, we didn't have the case. We had some ideas about sort of the things that would happen under this motion. We had some ideas what OG would like to bring, but for the rest, not really.
Yeah.
And we had one sort of idea about the extension, and that was that because there's conflict on Earth between religions, that would likely translate to conflict in this spaceship or on this new planet.
Which OG then torpedoed
by
saying there's no communication, which, to be fair, I think is probably reasonable.
Yeah. So our extension was gone. And then during the PM, like Kat mentioned during prep, like, oh, people will likely become sort of more extreme during the travels. And then it just clicked, like, that should be your extension. Just run with it, explain it for 7 minutes, and seems like workable. And I guess we're also a little bit lucky.
I mean, yes.
I can imagine it. I remember when I spoke in my Euro final that my partner and I spent a very large chunk of time saying, wait, isn't this motion with Suriname? Should we know Suriname? Aren't we the Dutch team in this round? And not knowing about that particular example before halfway through realizing that my partner had wrote an entire case file about South Africa, which is what we ended up thinking the emotion was more likely about, and then running with that. So it can be different in that sense. What I find interesting to learn from you here is how much the two of you are just able to come up with like an intuitive idea or an intuitive relation between the two and then just running with it. So there's always seems to be not necessarily super complex, let's build an academic topic about this, but there's always like this intuitive seed idea that gets developed. And I'm wondering if you feel in the same way, or is there sometimes a lot more work you need to do before you're able to get to these arguments?
I really like doing that part of debating. I like explaining things that are, in my opinion, true or plausible and sort of finding reasons for why they happen. So that's, I think, where I most intuitively go. I do think sometimes we have a bit of a more macro to micro approach where we talk about sort of the theory behind it and then sort of realize the one contentious element of that theory that is then filled in by a very common sense analysis proven by X mechanisms.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes we start like we do an approach where sometimes we start off from the analysis. I think that's much more what you do in prep. So you start off with sort of the developments which happen and you try to make arguments out of that. The way that I think about it is a little bit different, where I start with, you know, it would be so nice in this debate to sort of be able to prove this, because then the opposition is going to have a real hard time. And then sort of discuss whether we can prove that link. And like definitely in some debates, we go more with your ideas. I think in round 3 with the mindfulness, I had no idea what we could prove, but God had a lot of ideas, which in the end worked. We won that debate. And in some occasions, it works like better in my approach, but the fact that we can both bring a different approach at the table is, I think, very useful.
Very good. I'm wondering if there's something that you're currently seeing in debating that you really like as a certain argumentative trend, or are there things where you say, well, hold on a second, we managed to exploit that because everyone is being a bit of a fool in running that, and we will exploit this weakness in current debating?
I think a thing that I really enjoy about debating is that people are flagging significantly more what they are doing, in the sense of this piece of analysis does X, Y, Z for the debate. I think what we significantly exploited is that a lot of the time people are lying or very significantly overstating that by not being incredibly comparative to the motion or exclusive to their side of the motion. Which means that even though they have done a lot of work and they have labeled very clearly what that work is supposed to do, you can sometimes very much attack it with 2 sentences and be done at the point where you point out that something is not exclusive and why it is not exclusive, which I think is something people, I mean, it's not necessarily lazy, but I think it's something that people benefit from not doing, and it is definitely something that we learned as well to not do. But I think that may be even helped by the labeling process, because then you are much clearer on what your argumentation is supposed to do, which means you're likely to do sort of the necessary steps in order to make it actually do that.
Mm-hmm.
I agree. I feel like debating has become sort of increasingly mathematical, where we exactly go look for what this link can possibly prove in a debate. And that's also the thing that judges really like. So if you can like walk through your steps, flag, you're doing well. But the thing is, indeed, sort of a lot of teams bring analysis, which is then uncomparative. So it doesn't really prove your side. Like you're only making half of the argument where it happens on their side, but you're never explaining why it doesn't happen on your side. And that is something that we could exploit. Indeed, yeah.
I think, yeah, so the last bit, which I think nowadays in debating gets referred to as D delta. And I remember listening to most of your second language final speech, where you, I think, exploited that part particularly well, pointing out that large amount of teams found it difficult to create a comparison between a world with and a world without religious astronauts. So yes, that's indeed a wonderful point to bring into mind. Is there then perhaps finally a useful bit of advice that you could give to people who want to improve in debating and are listening to this right now?
Before I do that, I think we should mention that the Leiden delegation sort of made a drinking game out of every time that someone says delta in debate, they would drink. So, small part of that. I think for advice, it was something that we touched upon during this interview, but try to diversify. If you never speak whip because you think you can't rebut, that is bullshit. And if it's not bullshit, you should start learning how to rebut. So try to do a lot of things within debating. I've switched all positions, and that has helped me so much because in the end, explaining where something is true and explaining where something is not true is the same thing. You can learn all the skills, and you will need all the skills in all positions, in all speaker roles, to be an effective speaker. So that has helped me, but I also think it helped Kat very much. And that is definitely the most important piece of advice that I could give to people.
I think related to this potentially, insofar as it adds sort of a third level of perspective, is judging, and not necessarily just judging with a view toward rating as a judge, even though obviously that's very useful, but specifically judging with a view of like, okay, here is a speaker that normally I think is better than me, but as I'm judging them, I'm seeing gaps and I'm seeing what they should have done and what would have made them even stronger. And I mean, I had this very much in the past sort of 1.5 years, because I was at some point sort of very lucky and I got to judge very good rooms. And there were people who, if I was speaking against them, would wipe the floor with me every time. But as a judge, I got a very different perspective on what they were doing and how one could exploit gaps in what they were doing, which I think was just really useful information, both sort of emotionally in terms of motivation, but also just in order to improve myself and not fall into those same traps.
Fantastic. And I think that there's very few people who can now still wipe the floor with you, given the performances you showed last week. What's up next for you? Are we perhaps seeing you back at Korea Worlds or Korea Zoom Worlds, or is this it for you and you're moving towards other things?
Oof. We have discussed this, but we have not made the decision. Sort of, there is something in me that says you have to stop at the top, you know, like, is there going to be something better? On the other hand, I think if one thing this Euro has proved, that there is still a lot to improve, that I could reach the highest level that I reached in this Euros, that I could reach that all the time, that my new highs would possibly be even higher. There's always room for improvement, so I might do it because that seems like a delightful and definitely challenging and cool process. But otherwise, I might just judge. Like you, I will stick around the debating world at least. So then I'll do that. So you'll keep seeing me.
I'll definitely still be around. I will probably speak a bunch of tournaments because I want to, and it's enjoyable and fun, and there's no good reason not to for me. I'll still be coaching, so that's an additional reason to stay around. I'm almost certain I will be at Madrid. I'm either as a speaker or as a judge. I'm leaning towards speaking, but I'm also not super sure yet.
Okay, then I'm looking forward to seeing what's up next. Thank you very much for coming onto the show, Louis and Kat, and congratulations once again with your triple, almost victory in a sense, but the reigning European ESL champions and vice champions of the Open Final. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.